You know what seems like a great idea? Releasing a video about candidates who've dropped out. You know what's not a great idea? Uploading it on a day where one of the major candidates drops out. Welcome to Elected. I'm Luke Radel. This is kind of a bonus video talking about some breaking news right now. If you haven't heard, Senator Kamala Harris from California has just dropped out of the presidential race, maybe 7 hours after I released a video about candidates who have dropped out. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about Kamala Harris and where I think her campaign went wrong, and some things that I may have, some candidates that I've missed talking about as I've been off for the last few months. So let's get right into it. Kamala Harris did announce today that she was not going to be running as a candidate anymore. She suspended her 2020 campaign. And this comes on the heels of many articles. You know, maybe there was like a front page article every 2 weeks telling us how the Kamala Harris campaign had broken down. And there was one particularly scathing one in the New York Times this week, which described how an aide resigned, saying that the campaign was poorly run. But it also detailed one of the issues that I think has been plaguing a lot of candidates here in this campaign is the tale of these two lanes of the Democratic Party, the moderate wing and the progressive wing. And the problem is that for Kamala Harris, which is what was described in this New York Times article, she hasn't been able to figure out which lane she wanted to run in. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to be a progressive and go for, you know, those types of voters who are in the progressive wing of the party, or whether she wanted to stay more moderate, bring people together. The main problem with this assumption is because you can't really ride the middle of those two lines because candidates don't know who you are. You're considered wishy-washy, all that type of stuff. So it wasn't really clear from the Kamala Harris campaign what she actually stood for on policies and things like that. She was never very involved in the healthcare debates during the Democratic debates. She's never very involved in the policy nitty-gritty aspects. Where she came with leadership was when she was, you know, talking to the vice president in that iconic moment. That little girl was me, talking about race, talking about the structural issues with the Democratic Party. So the main issue was she couldn't ride the center of that line, but it was also going to be very difficult for her to hop into a lane, especially at this point in the race, because those two lanes are already filled. They're already pretty well established for the Democratic Party right now, and, you know, short of a long shot candidate coming in and shaking things up, it looks as if right now Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg and maybe Amy Klobuchar have established themselves as the moderate candidates. You know, so Joe Biden is the really leading moderate candidate. Many people, you know, are agreeing with that. So if he has a major gaffe, which he's been known to do, or if he falters, then someone like a Pete Buttigieg or an Amy Klobuchar or maybe even a Cory Booker could come in and step into that role as the moderate candidate for the Democratic Party. But the progressive wing, we've already got Liz Warren and Bernie Sanders and, you know, a bunch of other failed candidates who have tried to be in that progressive wing and dominate over these two incredibly experienced members of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. So she wasn't going to be able to establish herself in the progressive wing. She wasn't going to be able to really establish herself in the moderate wing. So she was trying to ride that line all the way through, hoping to get support, hoping to kind of pick up some traction. And SNL pointed this out in the last debate.
Mama needs a GIF. Gonna tell my kids this was Michelle Obama.
She was really looking for some attention from, you know, fundraising wise, and she was not getting it. And one of the things that she did too, when her campaign was struggling, she moved her focus just to Iowa, just to the Iowa caucus.
That's how I felt.
Yeah,
I really love being in Iowa. I have to tell you, I really do.
But despite all of that talk about how much she loved Iowa and how much she loved the people of Iowa didn't seem to love her very much. She wasn't doing well in polling in Iowa. She wasn't doing well in New Hampshire. And it was unclear whether or not she was going to be able to hang on to more friendly states in the South like South Carolina. And the same problem has been going on with Joe Biden, who, even though he's being bankrolled by a lot of the Democratic leadership and the establishment figures who are paying into his campaign millions of dollars, they're not sure whether he's going to be able to hang on if he does end up losing the first two states of Iowa and New Hampshire. Because right now in polling, it's looking like, you know, Pete Buttigieg or Elizabeth Warren or other candidates are leading over Joe Biden in those early states, and they're not sure whether or not he's going to make it to South Carolina, even with all the money he's been raising right now. Kamala Harris was not raising that money, so it was a long shot that she would make it to South Carolina, and it was even more of a long shot that she'd actually win South Carolina, because Joe Biden has been the candidate thus far who has been a moderate candidate in that moderate lane who has gotten the support of African Americans. And that was what Kamala Harris would have needed to see, some sign that she could hang on to South Carolina, and that if she did hang on to South Carolina that she could win. She didn't get that sign.
So here's the deal, guys. My campaign for president simply does not have the financial resources to continue, and the financial resources we need to continue.
I want to pivot back to what happened when I initially saw this dropping out announcement. I was very surprised by it because I had seen all the articles about the turmoil going on in her campaign, and like I said, there were a lot of warning signs that Kamala was not going to be the nominee, of course. But I thought that she'd hang on because I thought that she'd be able to reinvent herself and maybe get herself back into the race in a big way, establish herself in one of the two lanes, and become a candidate for everyone to get behind. The problem is we've already seen that in this race, and I want to compare it to another candidate who we weren't able to cover because he dropped out, in the middle of September. It was Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke started out as the Democrat from Texas, the one who almost did, the engine who almost could. He ran a very tight Senate race against Republican Ted Cruz, which, a Democrat running a tight race in, statewide in Texas is not an easy feat. And he made a lot of headlines as a moderate and was going to try and get in that moderate wing, maybe be the person that's the backup for Joe Biden. But, right in the midst of his prime, I guess, Pete Buttigieg swung in and became the, Democrats' new it candidate. So, Beto O'Rourke was suffering in polls and fundraising. And so after the shootings in El Paso, Beto reinvented himself, whether it was out of a genuine concern for, gun rights, or for gun control, or for, whether it was a calculated political move. He reinvented his campaign and decided to roll out a very progressive agenda on gun control.
Yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
However, this reinvention so quickly obviously wasn't sustainable for him because he ended up having to drop out in September. And I think right now, looking back on it, Kamala Harris maybe could have tried to make one of those jumps, tried to jump into the lane head first, but I don't know if it would have worked. I don't know if she would have been able to sustain a campaign jumping into a lane that fast in such a crowded field. So, Kamala Harris is out. What do you guys think about it? John Delaney's still in. He's somehow pulling all the money to keep going in this race. He has established himself as a moderate candidate, so maybe it is about picking your lane and sticking to it. But then again, we'll see. It's a crazy Democratic primary process, and we hope you're watching it all here with us. Thanks for watching. I'm Luke Ray.